My name is Guy Walsh. I work as the advisor to the Deputy Commander and to the Executive Director at US Cyber Command. My actual title is called Strategic Initiatives. I arrived at US Cyber Command, I'll say in a very circuitous way in terms of career-wise. I had spent about 23 years on active duty, primarily in the air domain. Started out, graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1979, went through pilot training, started out flying RF-4s and F-4s early in my career. Converted eventually to the A-10, spent about 25 years in close air support. Had the opportunity to go and spend 7 years with the National Guard, so I actually left the active duty, joined the Air National Guard as the commander of the Maryland's 175th Wing, and did that for, like I said, as the wing commander there for a little over 7 years. Was given an opportunity to come back on active duty to stand up operations in Kandahar in 2009, standing up the 451st Air Expeditionary Wing in Kandahar. Did that for about 13 months. Following that, when I came back, I was actually looking at separating and going into starting an LLC, and was given the opportunity at that time by a gentleman by the name of General Keith Alexander and his deputy director of the NSA, Chris Inglis, the opportunity as they were standing up US Cyber Command to be part of that organization. I explained to them I was not a cyber or a communications or a intel subject matter experts, which is what I would assume they were looking for. And the response that they gave me was interesting from the perspective, they said, we're not looking to teach you cyber, we're looking for you to bring warfighting, planning, experience, and operations to the cyber, and literally it was about changing culture. What are those things that we're not doing that we should be doing as a command? And what are those things that we're not doing well that we can be doing better? One of the things that I had seen as we came on and we're standing up a new command and going through an organizational process, one of the things that was absent there was really a reserve component piece to US Cyber Command. And so one of the first things we stood up was a Guard and Reserve Office, a Guard and Reserve Directorate, or the GRD. And that was to be able to look at additional capacity, whether that be surge capacity, and look at those skill sets that were brought by the reserve component. Folks who, the majority of reservists, are full-time working in the commercial, private industry area, and they bring very specific skill sets, they bring networks, they bring an understanding of the commercial and industry sector that we tend to lose when we are enveloped within our military operations. So that was the very first in terms of building out an organization and creating an organization and being able to bring additional capacity and scope to that. So the first one I'll say was bringing up the Guard and Reserve. Coming out of the aviation area, we spent a lot of time in terms of exercising and in terms of conducting operations for how we will perform in combat operations. That didn't exist at US Cyber Command when we showed up. I was very fortunate. Within the command, we had a J7, Colonel George Lamont. We had a Mark Jamerson, Colonel Mark Jameson out of the J3, who was helping to build up the J3, who was bomber and EWO experience. And we had a gentleman by the name of Colonel Tim Lunderman, who was the Guard advisor. We took these three folks who understood some of those training aspects and exercises that we did for 25 years in the aviation domain called Red Flag. And we said, okay, how do we adopt that, something that was very successful in the air domain, and how do we adopt that in cyber? And we literally took a program, we took the textbook for running Red Flag, Operation Red Flag at a Nellis Air Force Base, and we converted that, almost globally replaced the word air to cyber. And by doing that, we physically went out to Nellis Air Force Base, we did the mass briefing, we did 4-hour vulnerability periods, we did shot validations, and we did a mass debriefing, just exactly like we did. But instead of stepping out to an F-16, an A-10, or an F-15, we stepped over to the computers. We built a team that was called the Opposing Force, very specifically not necessarily a red team, but a team that emulated a very specific adversary, and we went up against those adversaries. So it was a blue versus red with those type pieces there. The next one I was asked to do was actually with the new commander, which was Admiral Rogers when he came on board, and they were looking at the organizational construct, and the simple question was, are we organized right for what we need to be doing? And what we found is we lacked what we needed to do in terms of the technical piece, in terms of an office that we now call our J9, but building out what are the technical capabilities that we have to build upon. And so we established a capabilities development group. And that was an opportunity I was given to stand up the capabilities development group with a then Colonel Paul Stanton at the time to be able to develop that. The most current and the one that is probably of the most interest from a NDU perspective is standing up an academic engagement office. Typically, as a combatant commander, your focus is on an operational and building some of the strategy and capabilities that General Nakasone is now leading in terms of U.S. Cyber Command as a combatant command. On the side of that, the importance is how are we engaging for those areas where we don't have the manpower and personnel and the resources to focus? How do we leverage other areas, just like we did with the National Guard and the Reserve component? And now we're doing that to reach out to universities, to reach out to academic institutions and building that. So that's probably the most current piece of that, is building an academic engagement and outreach, a working group, and all of the knowledge, whether it be technical, whether it be policy, across the board. In reality, if you look at where we have come since I was given the opportunity to come on board in 2010 to where we are today, the progress has been simply amazing, okay? And that has been part by design and clearly part by having the right leaders at the right time. Each of the first 3 commanders of U.S. Cyber Command faced a very different responsibility roles in terms of what they did. From General Alexander, in terms of actually standing up U.S. Cyber Command, physically locating it with the National Security Agency, and being able to leverage everything he had in his position as the director of the National Security Agency to help build that organization was absolutely tremendous. So the idea of building it up and shaping it and maturing under the auspices and physically, not physically located, but completely organizationally well-tied and partnered with the National Security Agency was a tremendous success story in terms of what that did. Admiral Rogers, as he came on board, brought the experience of having been a fleet cyber commander, so commanded it at the component area, and he was given what General Alexander has described as a construct with 133 teams, with building a cyber mission force, with building out different types of those teams. General Alexander had known all along this was an iterative process. He knew the 133 teams may not be the right number. He knew that the construct of what those teams look like, but it was a starting point to say, here's what it is for now, and then we'll grow with it. Admiral Rogers now had the responsibility of taking those teams and bringing those to an operational capability. So he had that within the constraints of the training, the pipelines, and the requirements of the service, helping to do the organized, train, and equip to bring those forces to bear, and being able to do that. And Admiral Rogers did a tremendous job in generating those outcomes and generating that within the authorities. General Nakasone, as of a year ago, had the responsibility of standing this up as a combatant command, given new authorities and having taken this to the next step. If you look at General Nakasone's background for how he got to the position he's at right now, I don't know that any other 4-star in our nation's history has been, and groomed is the wrong word, but set up for success as much as he has. He has been involved in the development from working as a colonel and a small group under General Alexander to help form the initial Cyber Command. He then took over and was the commander, the second commander, I believe it was, of the Cyber National Mission Force and saw it from an operational perspective. He then took over the services as the our Cyber Commander, and now, most recently again, celebrating 1 year as the commander of U.S. Cyber Command as a combatant commander. And so if you look at how that growth and having seen and understands the organization, and so General Nakasone now, again, having additional authorities, but also additional threats that didn't exist before. And we bring that straight into, we had seen threats from criminal, we had seen nation-state actors into, looking at how it impacts national security. And the most recent ones here that he's had to face is clearly the electoral process and the meddling with the U.S. electoral process. And so with that, General Nakasone has set out this new strategy of the persistent engagement in terms of working and how we work and partner better across the globe. And that has been absolutely tremendous to watch as to watch that come together and to have watched U.S. Cyber Command evolve, as well as watching the mission and the capacity and capabilities also continue to grow. Let's start and look at education in a very broad level. I think as you look at, and I'll start with, right now there are only, I believe, 4 universities in the U.S. that actually have a cyber science major. 2 of those are 2 of our service academies, right? So the Naval Academy and our U.S. Air Force Academy, thanks to Chris Inglis out at the Naval Academy, have built that actually into a major and created the cyber science as one of those type pieces there. So if you look across the academic universities at the undergraduate level, we are just starting to see that filter up. That will obviously start informing and building out the capabilities that exist now at the graduate level. And we talk graduate level, I also think it's important to talk about how we are training our military folks, whether it be our PME institutions, how the College of Information and Cyberspace, and how those come together along with our War College here at NDU, as well as with the services and their War College. And I think that is something that is continuing to evolve and mature, and we'll continue to do that over the next several years. There are several universities. So again, here as we've been standing up U.S. Cyber Command's Academic Engagement Office, we have physically located with NSA's Academic Engagement Office. Very well resourced, very well planned out, and a mature system, right? They have over 200 universities throughout the United States that they have work with and provide certificates of academic excellence, or CAE. So as you look at that type piece there, what NSA has been able to build over the past almost 10 years, they've been doing it with their Academic Engagement Office. U.S. Cyber Command is trying to do the same, but look at our mission set, which is a little bit different, right? Rather than the intelligence community, it's much more about that operational community. And as we take a look at that, I think we're looking at changes that we have to impact, right? So where are the key changes going to be? It'll be changing law. There'll be some in changing policy, but being able to identify that. So I don't anticipate that U.S. Cyber Command is going to jump and be at a level that the NSA has reached over its 10 years of doing its academic engagements and its academic outreach. But I do think that at least that starting point and being able to work with some of the major universities, primarily with a lot of their graduate students. We work very closely with universities and some of the university-affiliated research centers, such as Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab and some of the others that are out there. And so that's a big piece where that we will leverage them as partners within U.S. Cyber Command, and helping to build that will be an important part of this Academic Engagement Office.